everybody. For those that didn't sit in on the last session, my name is George Burnette. I've been with ENFOS 5 years, and for the last year and a half, I've been working with our development team on implementing our business intelligence submodule. So my perspective on the business intelligence submodule is as the end user. So this session is looking at the basic ad hoc reporting screens and actually looking at how they work, what all the different panels in those screens mean, and really prepping you for tomorrow's end-to-end user training session. So this is going to be the broadest of the 4 breakouts on BI. So looking at specifically the new ad hoc creation workflow, we start on the left with the customer domain, which you'll always see a domain for the client that you are logged into. So if you're logged into 7-Eleven, you're going to see 7-Eleven. If you're logged into Farms, you'll see Farms, so on and so forth. And that domain contains all of the available data sets. Some of those data sets are joined, like these 3 red ones, which just means that those can be used together with linked data. Once you have your data sets, your fields within those data sets selected, we move into the stage where you can define your ad hoc report type. So from those types, we have just a standard column table. We've also got pivot tables, which we call crosstabs in the system, and charts. And there's a little over 24 different default chart types to choose from. Once you've got that information sorted, and you can actually jump between all 3 of those during the creation process, you'll define your data filters. So that could be any of the fields or measures that you've selected from your data sets. So you can do things like date boundary conditions, specific contacts, specific valid values, and filter out the specific reporting content that you want to see. And then we get into formatting, saving, and publishing. So taking a look at the first step, which is going to the right submodule. So we've got a new module under the reporting module called Data Insights, and we're going to look specifically at the new ad hoc submodule. The first thing you're going to see when you click the new ad hoc is this white pop-up with the customer domain. You're only ever going to see one domain here, except for in the test system, where you might see multiple domains as we test data sets and release those. So we're in the ENFOS production system right now, with the owner called ENFOS, where we built out a lot of dummy data to look at. So if you were in here for the last session, you've already seen a screenshot like this, which is selecting your data sets. So we selected 3 here on the right: invoice with WBS, invoice summary, and PO summary. Now I can join that with any of the data sets on the left-hand side of my screen that have not been grayed out. So if they have been grayed out, it just means we have not identified the primary key to link the data sets together yet. So I have one additional data set available that I can link with this information, and that's for the AOC project summary information. Once you select your data sets, the next page is this one. And I've broken this out into 4 sections, which we're going to look at individually. On the left is your fields and measures. So this is all of the content within your selected data sets. On the right are your filter panel, or is your filter panel. So this is where you can create your filters, and there's about, I think it's 8 or 9 different filter types that you can use when discerning what data you want. The top bar is where you're actually building out the content in the report. So that's dragging and dropping fields and measures from the left panel into that top green section. And then the big section, the blue section, is where you're actually going to see the data as you build it out. So that's going to be your end product. So looking at that left panel, the fields and measures panel, we can see those same data set names that we saw after selecting the domain. The difference here is that those data set names are now broken out into 2 sections, fields and measures. The fields and measures, the primary difference is that the fields are all of your date fields, all of your valid value fields, anything that is not a number, essentially. So your measures are going to be all of your values So we can see that I've got financial data sets selected. So my invoice with WBS has my base invoice amount, my base invoice discount amount. And if I scroll down further, I'd see those same fields duplicated for both the local and transaction currency. So the transaction currency is popular for our non-US customers that are doing transactions in multiple currencies. So not just local and base, but they introduce a third or a fourth or a fifth currency too. Now there's a couple buttons that I've identified here too. The top one is where you can go back to that previous data set selector page and select more fields or more data sets to pull into your creation. And then we've got the field for custom fields and custom measures. So the first breakout I'm doing tomorrow is focusing on those two buttons, which brings up a formula builder, where the field or measure does not exist in ENFOS currently. You can create it from scratch. That top bar on that colorful page that's green is the designer tool pane. So we've got a handful of sections here. I'm going to start with the bottom one, which is all drag and drop. So from that last page that we looked at, the left panel of the data sets, fields, and measures, it's as simple as clicking and dragging them over. You can also right-click and send them to the fields or send them to the row or column section. I prefer the drag and drop method. You've got a couple of buttons across the top that I'd like to point out too. The standard floppy disk icon is your saving format, which we'll take a look at a little later. Because there's a couple different directories that you can save to based on your permissions. There's an export button, where we can export to 11 different formats. So if you want to send it to Excel or you want to get a PNG file, that's all available to you, as well as some files that can be imported into other reporting databases. The other two are the ad hoc report type and the data content restrictor. So the ad hoc report type is where you can jump between the crosstab, the table, and the chart view. So it's just a little drop-down menu. You can jump between all three of those at any point during your ad hoc creation build. And the content restrictor allows you to filter between a subset of sample data, I believe it's 100 rows, or your full data. So by default, it shows sample data because it lets you build up the report faster. You can also restrict the data by looking at filters. So we've got a handful of filters here. This is a little small, so I'll read them off here. This top one is the proposal expense category or your expense type. A lot of our clients only use reserve as a default expense type, but I know we've got clients in here that have 2, 3, 8 expense types. Jessica?
I have a lot of expense types.
So this top one is equals. It's an equals filter, which means I can define one filter type or one valid value within my list. But we've got all of these different options, and I've got a handful of different ones selected here. So this next one is an invoice approved date, and I've defined it as in between. So I've selected a relative date expression, year minus 3. So that's going to go back 3 years, and then I've let the standard date timestamp when I took the screenshot. So the nice thing about using the relative date expressions is I never have to go back into my dashboard or into my report and update the date ranges. If I use quarter, this quarter to last quarter, it's always going to jump with the quarters as we move through time. The invoice company here, I've selected is one of, so that allows me to define one or more invoice companies that I want to focus on. And with these filters, once you've published an ad hoc report and it's in a dashboard, you can actually pull the filters from the ad hoc to display on the dashboard too. So we can take a filter like invoice company and link it to multiple views in the dashboard and have a single filter update everything on the dashboard. In the bottom one here, I've created a does not contain filter for purchase order reference, and I filtered out ERP proposals, which is going to be an SAP sourced PO sent to ENFOS instead of one that was created through ENFOS. So this filter would allow me to see invoices approved in the last 3 years for reserve expense type for 4 specific vendor companies that were ENFOS source transactions. Now, if we look at that center section, which is actually your designer panel, where you can see what you're building, there's a lot going on here. So I built out just a fairly straightforward pivot table. This is life-to-date approved spend for reserve only by WBS level phase and vendor company. So we can see we've got our approved invoice amount. Then these sub-columns are all of the phases. We've got preliminary assessment, remedial investigation, feasibility study, remedial design, remedial action, and site closure. And then we've got a handful of PO companies on the far left, and then their specific purchase orders or work orders. And we can see how their spend is broken out by WBS.
You can filter the phases?
Yeah, so 1 or more phases, or you could exclude specific phases. Across the top here, I've added a couple of what looks to be very small screenshots in this room for different tools based on where you right-click in that designer pane. So this top left one is for the PO company, which we can see right here too. And when I look at that, I can do things like delete the row summary. So the row summary is these subtotals that we're seeing by vendor company. So if I want to see subtotals, I can, but if I don't care about those subtotals, it's as simple as right-clicking on the column header and deleting the row summary. The next one I've selected was the preliminary assessment column, and we're looking at a sort by ascending or descending values, or even filtering the top number of values. Maybe I only want to see my top 10 vendors by spend. I can do that just by right-clicking on the column and inputting the number 10, and we're good to go. This last one we use a lot, which allows us to change the data format. So when we're looking at spend like this, I might not care that for remedial action for this PO that I had 63 cents included. I might just want to round to the nearest dollar. And this change data format allows me to do that. So I can change it from that full 2 decimal place to just a rounded integer, and I can even change how my negative values are displayed, whether I want to see that negative sign or the parentheses. So very similar to Excel in that sense. Yeah, Rick?
George, quick question, and I asked this because I was just asked to produce it. Can you do a top 10 vendor spend by year?
Absolutely. Yeah. So there's all of the date fields are available in the financial data sets too. So you've got your submitted dates, your approved dates, your reconciliation dates, and all of those can be used either as filters or as column headers in charts or tables.
But it's not by actual date that it's approved, it's by year that it's approved, because by year it's approved, I don't see that column.
So we can actually, with the date fields, if you right-click on them, you can change the period by which the date is displayed. So if you want to see it by day, week, month, quarter, year, it's just changing how that date filters or that date field is being recognized. I think it goes down to millisecond, but I hope you're not tracking your time.
So to clarify that question, select year, that would be a rolling year in real time?
It would depend on if you defined the specific year. So if you did between 2018 and 2019, it would restrict it to that until you changed it. If you did a dynamic year filter, so you did year and year minus 1, when we move into 2020, it's going to bump your filters to 2019 to 2022. 2022.
Yeah.
George, when you extract out like this, if you changed the data format to drop the cents, let's just say, are you still going to get that in Excel, or is it going to drop it off?
It'll export what your current view is.
Okay, so it will drop the.
It should, yeah. So let's take a look at this same crosstab as a chart. So all I've done to get from that last view to this view is I've changed that drop down in the tool pane from crosstab to chart. We can see that I now have a new section that shows up in my filter panel, and this is my data level selector. So you may have a crosstab view that has more data that you want to see in the chart. But what this data level selector allows me to do is to back up the level of data that I'm looking at. So right now, I'm looking at this breakout by phase. But if I went a step further, I could see it broken out by, well, it's actually broken out by vendor company right now. But my rows filter, my data level filter, is selected to the center instead of all the way to the right. If I went all the way to the right, it would take these columns a step further and break it out by PO reference, by phase. So that level of detail might not be helpful on a chart because it's going to fill the screen with a lot of tiny little bars. But I can control that in real time by using my data level filter. Taking a look at the charts that are available, we've got quite a few. It defaults to just the standard column chart, but we've got things like stacked charts, inverted charts, and actually there's little snippets of JavaScript that you can embed into the charts too, if that's something you're interested in, to take all of the existing charts and invert them, change the colors, define data labels and things like that. So all of these, it's just as simple as clicking on the type you want to view, and it'll switch it over. If you do have a combination of fields and measures defined in your designer tool pane that is not compatible with the chart, it'll tell you. So for some of the things like the scatter and bubble charts, it has a specific number of measures that it's expecting to use to create that bubble chart. And so if you don't input the right amount in the right spot, it'll tell you where you went wrong. So speaking of those JavaScript windows, this is the chart formatter pane. So I can actually go back a slide here, and that's this little gear icon in the top left corner. So what this allows you to do is further customize the format of the chart output. So I wish these were a little larger, but the top one here is for the just standard axes. So you can change the direction and angle of your data labels. It's pretty straightforward to do. Defaults to 0, but if you want 45 or 90 degree angles or upside down, inverted 90 degrees, that's just a quick input of the button. The others, the middle one here for the chart format is really where you can define how your legend displays, or if it displays at all. So it allows you to do things like have a display right, left, top, bottom, have a border, and hide if you have a single measure in your chart, or a single, maybe you're only looking at approved invoice amount. You don't need to see invoice amount listed 30 times for each activity in your WBS, so you can hide that label and you'll only see the activity. And on the right hand here is actually the advanced property formats for the charts. So these PowerPoints will be made available to you with the recordings. So if you want to go in and see actually what this says, that'll be something you can do. And we're working on resources for the most popular JavaScript snippets for data formatting. But what this one actually enables is, the top one says series.datalabels.enabled true. And what that does is it enables the data labels to be displayed. So I've got just a little snippet of that previous chart here, where we can now see the numeric values by phase of WBS for those columns. The second one here is a series.datalabels.format piece, which actually is going to define what format I want to see the label in. So the first piece of JavaScript enables the format, or enables the labels. The second piece tells me how I want to see it. So if I want to see it with 2 decimal places or no decimal places, if I want to see the y-axis or the x-axis data label, if I want to see it as a percentage, that's all just little snippets of JavaScript.
Can you truncate? Can you truncate the dollar amount, like a 1,500,000, make it 1.5 million?
Not yet. So it will display the So there's actually a link on this page down here in the corner for more information. From this chart format page, this takes you to the Jaspersoft, Tipco Jaspersoft, who is the third-party provider for this BI product that we've embedded within ENFOS. This takes you to their community page where a lot of these JavaScript snippets are available, and you can just copy and paste them right in. The last thing I really wanted to look at today in this BI ad hoc creation session was the save structure. So we've got our chart that we've been looking at with the life to date spend by vendor and phase. When you save it with that floppy disk icon, you'll see two different sections. The top one is a folder called ENFOS, and then you'll see one for a personal folder. Based on your user permissions, if you have the BI admin permission, which will be primarily restricted to the client administrators, you'll be able to save things to the ENFOS folders. So you have one for ad hoc news, one for dashboards, and one for reports. If I want to make this report that we just built available to all of my users, this is the directory that I would save them. So this, you could view this as the public directory. Something to keep in mind is that with this being a public directory, it doesn't mean that all users will be able to see it. If an AECOM user logs in and looks at this spend by vendor, they're only going to see AECOM data because they only have access to AECOM sites. So you can still make a ad hoc view that includes all of your vendors and publish it for everybody, because ENFOS is going to reference their existing organizational privileges, their hierarchy permissions, and we're only going to expose data to the user that they already have access to. The bottom section here is the personal folder. That's where most of the users will save things that they create, or the admins can even save reports specifically to a specific user. And it's not broken out into ad hoc dashboards or reports. It's just a parent folder. You can drop everything in, and on the back end, we split it into the type of file that it actually is. So tomorrow, the first breakout session we're looking at is creating calculated fields and measures. So we're going to take a look at how to create your own fields and measures through the BI builder. So I've got just a quick example here for invoice count. So all I've done is I've pulled there's about 100 different built-in functions. I've pulled the count all function, a field called invoice reference, and the default value is current. So this is going to give me a count of all of my invoices, which then I can use in any of my reports. So I can see maybe the sum of vendor invoices, and I can see how many invoices they've actually had. I can then reference those fields together, get an average invoice, or see how many days it took the project manager to approve the vendor invoice, things like that. But we'll take a look at that in depth tomorrow, a lot of examples. And with that, I'll open it up to Q&A. Yeah,
Are you able to change on one of the axes? So I'm looking at one that has like 200,000, 400,000, et cetera. When you get the millions, it has 2,000 K or whatever. Can you change that axis at all?
you can. So you can define the both upper and lower limit of the axis, and you should be able to define the range between the values on the axis.
Are you going over that tomorrow on one of the sessions?
Not specifically, but it is available on that more information page with the job description.
Okay.
Any other questions?
If you're not an admin, can you create reports or dashboards for other employees in your company?
No.
Okay.
So you should be able to create them full based on your permissions. If you were given BI admin permissions, then yes, but that's probably not likely to happen. But if you had a dashboard that you designed, the admin can actually go in and open it from your account, and she or he can save it to other users.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you design something that you want your coworkers to see, You just need to let the system administrator know, and they can publish it to the rest of the users just by duplicating it. All right, well, I think we've got a break coming up, and then I think it's the keynote speaker, Jim Davison's up